I'm Keith Howes, and I was features editor for London Gay News from 1976 until 1979. Now, I want to tell you about this long distant past where there was no internet, and so of course no internet dating, there was no reality television, there was no Kim Kardashian, there was very little globalization. Things were much more sedate in those days. We used the telephone, we didn't use the mobile phone, we were much more sedate in our attitudes, and in England, of course, we were very sedate in our attitudes to homosexuality. Homosexuality had been legal for gay men from about 1967, but you had to be 21 and over. You couldn't be under, otherwise you risked prosecution. Now, Gay News was a newspaper. It was an independent newspaper for gay men and gay women. It started in June 1972. I joined in December 1975, and I was pretty green about the gay scene. I'd been in a relationship and I had gay friends, of course, but I didn't know what to expect coming to work with a group of gay people, because in the main they were all gay people at Gay News, because it was the newspaper for homosexuals, and it actually was, in the end, the world's largest circulation newspaper for homosexuals. It's known to history now mainly for its scandalous blasphemy trial at the Old Bailey, but there's so much more to it, and I just thought now, in 2013, it would be a good opportunity to talk to you about my role as features editor in this extraordinary publication called Gay News. Now, the editor of Gay News was one Dennis Lemon. Dennis Lemon did not go to university, and I didn't go to university either, but he was someone who had enormous drive, and he was determined that Gay News was not just going to be one of those fly-by-night collective flower power publications of the late 60s and early 70s. It was actually going to be a newspaper that came out every fortnight on time, and it did. Up until 1983, the newspaper arrived every fortnight on a Thursday, and it was sent all over Britain, often in a brown paper envelope, which is very useful, of course, for many gay people because they were not out of the closet. So that brown paper envelope with Gay News inside, it was their open sesame to the gay world, not just in London, but all over England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales. Now, I must tell you something, that in Scotland, homosexuality was still illegal for gay men. Amazing. In Ireland, it was, of course, illegal, because Ireland was a very strongly Catholic country. So as you can see, things were different then. My first job when I joined Gay News as features editor was to review a concert by Larry Grayson. Larry Grayson was a very popular TV comic who specialised in very camp humour, and his catchphrase was, "Shut that door." And I was sent along to interview Larry Grayson as well as to see the show. However, Larry Grayson hid in his dressing room from me, this horrible monster from this terrible newspaper called Gay News, because Gay News was regarded as something of a terrorist organisation who was going to drag all these lovely people out of the closet and drag them through the mud of scandal and disgrace. Nothing could have been further from the truth. Gay News was not about outing people. Gay News was about promoting the one simple phrase, gay is good. And if gay people wished to live in the closet, then that was their right. We did not go in for outing. My second job was to interview another television star, Angela Baddeley, who played Mrs. Bridges in the television series Upstairs, Downstairs. Maybe you remember her. She was the cook, and she, of course, was married to Mr. Hudson, the butler. And I went to interview her in her dressing room, and she said, "What is Gay News?" And I said, "Well, it's a newspaper magazine for homosexuals." She was so shocked. I thought it was a paper for happy people, because you see, again, in those days, supposedly the word gay just meant happy. It didn't mean homosexual. So she pretended, I think, not to know what gay meant, but I think she did know. She offered me a whiskey and was very, very keen for me to drink every last drop, not to waste it. I asked her what she thought of homosexuality. There's far too much talk of homosexuality today. It's boring. It's boring. You don't need to talk about it. Anyway, I finished the interview, which was called No Gays in Mrs. Bridges' Kitchen, and the lady died that weekend. That was my first interview for Gay News and my first interviewee, and it was posthumously published because she died just a couple of days after, in her sleep, very peacefully. My next interview was with Bryan Derbyshire. Bryan Derbyshire was the king of leather in Britain. He was always dressed in leather, and he appeared in and out of leather, mainly out of leather, in publications like Him. Now, Him was looked down upon by Gay News as being just pornography, pictures of naked men and articles on sex. Gay News was much, much more than that. But Bryan Derbyshire was agreed to be interviewed by Gay News, and I met him at the Coleherne pub, which was in Earl's Court, so West Kensington, and it was the haunt of leather guys. And we met, and he asked me in his strong Yorkshire accent, Lancashire actually, what you going to have? What you going to have for a drink? And I said, oh, I'll have tonic water. He said, oh, have you got the clap? I said, no, I don't drink. Don't drink? Well, of course, you know, that was one of the things which I had to learn, that you did have to have a few drinks if you were going to be a Gay News reporter. Anyway, he told me all the ins and outs of S&M and leather sex, and how he had this special word if the sex got a little bit too painful for his partner. The partner would shout out, Oklahoma! 2 years before, apparently, it had been marmalade. But anyway, this time it was Oklahoma. So we did the interview, it was published, and my mother, of course, who was reading Gay News, because I was working for Gay News, she was so upset. She said, how can you promote this sort of thing? It's disgusting, it's awful. So I told Bryan Derbyshire about it, and he was mortified. Oh, I'm so sorry I've upset your mother. Oh, what are we going to do? Okay. So Dennis Lemon rang my mother, spoke to my mother, and charmed her as he charmed everybody. And from that moment on, he was her Dennis, and she just loved Dennis, and I had no further trouble with any of the interviews that I did for Gay News. Though I must say that Bryan Derbyshire was one of the more extreme examples. Talking of extremes, we in 1976 were exposed to a new phenomenon in music. It was called punk. It was called punk rock. Gay News was very much involved with pop music, and in fact Dennis Lemon's boyfriend, Jean-Claude, who was also the art director, he used to do a fortnightly column called Sapphires and Diamonds, which was a review of LPs and singles. Very, very good. And it was everything from disco, soul, Motown to Cliff Richard. And Cliff Richard probably got the best reviews of his career in Gay News. He didn't want to be interviewed by Gay News, but he got very good reviews. And Jean-Claude said, why don't you do something on punk? Why don't you get into punk? Now, I stopped being interested in pop music with Elvis Presley. That was an awful long time ago. So what was I going to do with this thing called punk? So I enlisted the aid of a chap called Alan Wall, and together we explored this new world of punk. And we interviewed Gene October, Bobo Phoenix, Jordan, and Pete Shelley, he of the Buzzcocks. And I was very impressed with most of them, particularly Pete Shelley, a highly thoughtful and intelligent young man. So when we did the article, when we did the finished article, we decided we would illustrate it in a way that would irritate some of the more conservative of our gay readers. So we got a dustbin. Into the dustbin we put a record cover which had Judy Garland on the front cover, Saint Judy. We put a sunray lamp. We put the Times newspaper and a few other precious objects of the conservative straight establishment, of which, of course, many gay men were part. And that was our article on punk, and we called it What's in it for us? Punk, of course, led to the film by Derek Jarman, Jubilee, which starred Jean October and Jordan. And Derek Jarman, of course, was someone that we had quite a big association with because the year before he directed a film called Sebastiane, which was extraordinary for two reasons. One, it was in Latin, and two, most of the characters, males, were naked for much of the film. This was really, I suppose you could say, the first gay British film. And Derek Jarman went on to do The Tempest, and each time he made a film, I interviewed him. Derek Jarman did not think much of gay news. He thought it was middle class. He thought it sold out to the establishment by having all these adverts for things like beauty aids for gay men. He thought this was really crawling to the worst elements of consumerism and materialism, which perhaps indeed it was. But we had to sell advertising space in order to fund the newspaper, which, as I said, appeared every fortnight without fail and went round to our readership. And our readership comprised everybody from Oxford Regius professors to people who could not write. They could read, but they could not write. So when we wrote articles for Gay News, we had to write in a very easy to understand fashion that was not stupid and was not illiterate. So it was a difficult ask, and I tried the best I could in the 4 years that I was there to write articles that were pertinent, that had humour in them, and were intelligent.